Hi, Ian Bean here and welcome to another training video. This one's entitled Motivate, Engage, Influence and Control, and it was delivered originally for the Scottish Sensory Service back in 2019. This video focuses specifically on looking at how technology can meet the communication and access needs of young people with profound and complex additional support needs. Throughout the course of this video I'll be sharing resources and activities, many of which are free. You'll find them all on my website www.ianbean.co.uk. I've added the URLs to the slide for those people that need them. So how do students in this specific group access technology? Well, usually it's one of three different ways. They'll either access technology with a switch, with a touch device, or more recently with eye gaze systems. And in this video we'll explore each of those in turn, looking at the strengths and weaknesses of those access systems for individual students. We'll look a little bit at assessment, we'll look a little bit at teaching practice, and we'll look at what constitutes success for students. Whenever we're thinking about using technology with students who have additional support needs, it's useful to have a framework to work to, something which can guide the way that we think about the kind of technology we'll use, how we'll introduce it. And my favourite framework of all, and I've used this for many years, is the SET framework. SET stands for Student, Environment, Task and Tools. It helps focus our mind on what's important during this process and to decide some priorities. So let's start with the first S, the student. It's important that we know as much as we can about the person that we're going to work with. Who are they? What do they like? What do they dislike? What can they do? What do they have difficulties with? The more we understand the needs of the student, who they are as a person, and how they learn, the better our choice of technology will be. E, the environment. For schools that means the classroom and probably the child's home too. Who's in that classroom to support the student? There's little point in recommending a sophisticated eye gaze system with grid-based communication when there's nobody in the classroom who understands the technology, knows how to create new grids and keep the system running day to day. Are support materials available? How about attitudes and expectations? Are there people in school that will champion the use of this technology to help the student make progress? T, the task. What is it that the child actually needs to learn? It's really important that we identify that so that we have some measure for knowing whether we're actually achieving any success with the use of technology. The final T are the tools that we choose to deliver that. It's at this point that we're considering whether we're going to use switches or touch screens or eye gaze systems or some other high-tech or low-tech solution to achieving that goal. What's really useful about the SET framework is our choice of tools comes only when we understand the needs of the student, we understand who they are, where they are, who's there to support them, and what it is that they actually need to learn, before we get around to thinking about, does this child need an iPad? And that's actually quite different to what normally happens in schools. Often schools will buy technology and then try and find children that will use that technology rather than the other way around. If you're interested in reading more about the SET framework and the work of Joy Zabala and the team at CAST, I've put a little link at the bottom of the slide there which will take you to the whole of the SET framework documents. I've used it for many years and I find it the single most useful thing to help focus my mind on what's important during this process. Many people who know me or who have followed my career through the years will know that I'm responsible for creating perhaps the most famous activity in special schools, that singing hippopotamus. What few people know is the reason why I made that singing hippopotamus. I made it for a little boy that was in my class, and there's a picture of him there on the left. He's a young man and he had quite severe cerebral palsy and found pressing a switch particularly difficult because of his restricted movement. When this youngster came into my class, we didn't really have much in the way of switch software. Back then, our choices were quite limited. We had Blob from Widget Software, which was a red blob that sat on the screen and wiggled around whenever you pressed the switch. Or we had Clicker, which allowed you to create simple sentences by pressing the switch to select letters. I remember the first time I tried Blob with this young person. He was particularly disinterested. Wouldn't you press the switch at all, no matter how much we tried to coax him. In fact, I figured out that he'd developed a particularly impressive strategy for not having to press the switch at all. With a simple "oh," he was able to get my classroom assistant to come over and say, "Oh, bless you, shall we have a look at it?" And then my classroom assistant would press the switch. Back then I was pretty determined that we would have some success with this, so I pushed on and kept trying to encourage him, but he showed little or no interest in the activity at all, and if pushed too far, he'd revert to another behavioural strategy to avoid doing any work, which was he would vomit on me. So, determined to win this battle of wills, I sent my classroom assistant on an errand, donned my rubber apron, and started with "press the switch," and of course we got nothing. Now, I've learned a lot over the years, and one of the most important things I've learned has been not to use words like "press the switch." If we prompt people to press the switch, our focus is the switch, and of course for the child is not interested in the switch at all. They're interested in the reward that the switch will generate. So we shouldn't be saying to children, "press the switch." We should be prompting them to produce more of those wonderful rewards. So my prompts are never "press the switch." My prompts will be things like "more," or "more music," "more hippopotamus." So picture the scene. With my classroom on an engineered errand around school, I'm sat in the corner of the classroom with this young man, dressed in my rubber pinny, and spouting "press the switch" to a child that is totally and utterly disinterested. It was at that moment that I thought to myself, why am I doing this? What's happening here? The more I observed, the more I realised that the amount of effort this young person had to put in just to be able to press that switch was immense, and the reward he was getting back from that was absolutely nothing. So I decided to change my approach and actually start to think about what this young man might actually like, what he might find interesting and enjoyable. And we tried a few things before I finally settled on a singing hippopotamus. Now remember, this is the days before YouTube, where it's much easier to find videos that children might find interesting. I showed this young man the video of the singing hippopotamus, and he smiled, and I figured that I'm on a winner. So I created a little activity in PowerPoint featuring this video, showed him the switch, showed him the activity, and then handed it over to him. And guess what? He pressed the switch. Not once, not twice, but for 40 minutes straight. Whenever the activity finished, he'd press the switch to start it again. For anyone that's lived on Mars for the last 20 years, here's a look at that hippopotamus activity. It was an absolutely amazing moment. This young man was actively engaged with pressing the switch to start this particular piece of animation. While I'm sat observing him, I noticed something particularly interesting. He never once looked at the screen. So for 40 minutes of pressing the activity, he never looked at what was actually happening on the screen. Now that's quite interesting for me as a software designer, because I've always understood that the colours that we use on screen are important, that the complexity of the images that we present on screen are important in order to help engage a child so that they can actually see and make sense of what's on the screen. And yet, he didn't look at it at all. So what was he looking at? Well, strangely enough, he was looking at my classroom assistant's bottom as she was dancing around the screen to the singing and the music. As I looked around the classroom, it was immediately obvious that not only my classroom assistant was enjoying this music, but the rest of the class were too. There were children sat in their chairs rocking. My other classroom assistant was dancing around the room with a child in a wheelchair, and the whole room was having fun. And it struck me. The whole room was having fun because this young man was making that happen. He was in charge of it. He was responsible. He was making all of this wonderful fun happen in my classroom. Now imagine just for 1 second how that must feel for a young man like this boy, whose whole life is spent waiting for people to do things to him. Now he's responsible for all of this wonderful fun and happiness in my classroom. Imagine the self-esteem he must feel from that. It was at that moment that I learned what was possibly the most important thing in my whole career. That cause and effect isn't about making something happen. The term making something happen is a marketing term that we came up with at Inclusive Technology as a way of simply distilling this idea that a child can create something in the classroom. What cause and effect really is a child's ability to understand that they are able to extend influence and control over their immediate environment. And that includes the people in their immediate environment. It was a powerful lesson, and it's informed everything that I've done in the ensuing 20 years or so. That hippopotamus activity was a firm favourite with students in our school. When we put it onto the website, it was downloaded millions of times in the last 20 years, and it's still a favourite with students when I visit schools around the world. If you were to choose any activity from the Priory Woods website, I'd be able to tell you who I made that activity for and why. However, not everything that I made at Priory Woods ended up on the website. My head teacher used to say, "Ian, there is a line that you mustn't cross," and occasionally I made activities that crossed that line. Here's one of them. So my starting point when working with any student is always what motivates that student. What is it that interests them? What do they like to look at, listen to? What makes them laugh? Because that information is really, really important when it comes to choosing the kind of activities that I'll use when I'm working with them. It's also useful to know what technology they're currently using and how they interact with that. The more information I have about a student, the better decisions I can make about the kind of technology that I'll choose for them and how I'm going to work with them. To help focus my mind on these important questions about students, I often ask myself a simple question. If our students could choose their own targets, what would they be? I'm inclined to believe there'd be 3 targets. The first would be that I want to be as independent as I can be. The second, that I want to be able to communicate to the best of my ability. And the third, and probably the most important target for young people, is that they'd want to be happy. And these targets often sit in the back of my mind whenever I'm working with students. Indeed, whenever I observe people working with students, I think to myself, does this activity help this child become more independent? Does it help improve their ability to be able to communicate? And are they happy doing it? And I often think, if the activities that we're doing don't contribute to any of those 3, I sometimes question, should we actually be doing it at all? And of course, with this particular student group, where very few students will have the ability to be able to articulate their wants and needs to you in a meaningful way, it's important that we learn to understand them despite the lack of language. That's why I place such emphasis on observation, taking the time to sit down and just watch what's happening, how the child's responding, what it is that makes them smile, The young people we work with do communicate with us. They may not use words, but they communicate with us through their body language, through their behaviour, and lots of other ways. And it's important that we take the time to look and learn and listen to what it is that they're trying to say to us. These three words underpin everything that I do in my work: motivation, opportunity, and meaning. Now let me explain what I mean by those. Motivation is understanding what motivates the student. And I've written here, what's in it for me? Because that's an important question that we need to consider. When we present a child with a switch, why should they press it? What's in it for them? They don't understand that somewhere along the line they may well be able to use that switch to access single switch step scanning. They want to know what's in it for me now. And that means giving them activities which they find motivating, interesting and fun. Opportunity. That means providing the student with opportunities to practice using their switch, their touchscreen or their eye gaze system throughout the school day. We've long ago given up the idea of ICT suites, dedicated ICT lessons, where for 45 minutes a week a child would get access to a switch or a touchscreen or a device and build their access skills. If a child's using one of those devices, they need to use it throughout the school day, as many times as we can possibly engineer, which leads me quite nicely to the third of those three words: meaning. That means that the activities that we use and the opportunities that we create for our students in order to be able to use the devices actually have some connection to the real world. That what we're doing contributes to developing a skill that they will use throughout their life. So if we're making choices, we're making meaningful choices. There's a lovely activity available on the iPad where you make a choice by tapping one object on the left-hand side of the screen over and over, and with each tap the object changes into something else. So for example, I touch it and it's a drink of orange juice, I touch it again, it's a drink of milk, I touch it again, it's a drink of water. If I want that water, I then touch the right-hand side of the screen and that would select the water. When was the last time you chose anything on a touch screen like that? You never did. You can choose like that, but you would need to use two switches to do that. The activity as a touch activity makes no sense whatsoever and has no connection to the way that people use technology. If that activity is used with two switches, it fits perfectly with developing two-switch step scanning. Activities need to have meaning. They need to be grounded in what we do as an integral part of what we do in our classroom every day. As I said earlier, cause and effect isn't about making things happen. It's understanding that you can extend influence and control over your immediate environment and the people in it. Now that is communication personified. My ability to be able to extend influence and control over other people. So let's take a closer look at one of those, motivation. On my website you'll find over 500 cause and effect or choosing activities for young people with additional needs. And they're all, well almost all, focused around characters from TV, film or music that children are likely to enjoy. Here's a couple of examples.
Baby shark do-do-do-do-do, baby shark do-do-do-do-do, baby shark do-do-do-do-do, baby shark.
Of course not everybody likes Baby Shark, and there may be a few people out there thinking, well, my students are 15, they shouldn't really be looking at things like Baby Shark. Well, that's a question for another day. What happens if they're a fan of Ed Sheeran? Or what about The Witcher? try very hard to include activities that children will find interesting and motivating, and find myself having to make new activities almost every week when new TV programs appear or new films hit the cinema. I get asked quite regularly to make age-appropriate things, and I try where possible to do that. However, age appropriateness just seems to get me into trouble. I've made lots of activities for adults with learning difficulties which contain the odd swear word. You wouldn't imagine how many emails I've had from people saying that a song lyric with swear words isn't age appropriate, it's just rude. And I've come to the opinion that age appropriateness means whether the teacher likes it or not. Shocking, I know, but true. Of course, we can't spend the whole day using activities with the Flintstones, so I've tried where possible to make activities which will tie into and can be used to support activities and routines, transitions throughout the school day. And I'd like to share a couple of those with you now.
I said hello everybody, I said hi hi, I said hi hi, everybody hi. I said hello everybody, I said hi hi, I said hi hi, everybody, I said hello.
Days of the week, days of the week, days of the week, days of the week, days of the week.
What's the weather? What's the weather like today? Like today? Look outside the window, look outside the window. Can you say? Can you say?
So let's begin our exploration of these three access methods. Regardless of which technology we use, we're going to be faced with learners who are pre-intentional, experiential learners, learners who are not yet initiating activities or interactions with technology or with people. For these learners, we need to focus on looking and listening, and we do that by providing them with activities which they'll find interesting to look at and listen to. And hopefully, by using those activities, we'll elicit responses from them, positive responses, which we can then use to engage them with the activity and with that particular access device. Understanding what motivates a child to look and listen is incredibly important. Motivation really is key here, and our understanding of what the child finds interesting to look at and to listen to is really, really important, because that informs the kind of activities that we choose for them. Whenever I think about motivation, my mind always goes back to John. There's a picture of him on the screen. John was very difficult to engage with anything to do with technology until we found out his absolute love for spinning patterns. And you can see there, despite the fact that that photograph is now 20 odd years old, John is absolutely, utterly entranced by that activity. Of course, at this stage, we can and should use anything at all that we think might help motivate that student. Videos from YouTube, Switch toys, activities in the multi-sensory room, music, anything at all that you think the child might like to look at and listen to. As you work with the child, make short notes about the things that they found most pleasurable, and very soon a pattern begins to emerge. We can begin to identify those things we know that they will definitely respond positively to. Once we have that information, we can then use that to provide exactly the type of activity that they enjoy using. And remember that every child's different. For every child that you find that likes pop music, you'll find another who loves Elvis Presley. A lot of our children with very complex needs, their musical taste are influenced by their parents' musical taste. Try to find things that are familiar to the child. I once worked with a student who's very difficult to find anything that they would respond to, until a quick word with his mum told me that One of his favourite things was his sister singing the song I'm a Little Teapot. So I sent a Big Mac home in his bag and asked his mum to get his sister to record that song on the Big Mac. The next day we tried that in the classroom, and that little boy's face broke into a huge smile when he heard it, and we knew we had something to work with. Once you've identified those things that the child likes to look at and listen to, we can then pull them together into a simple activity. You'll probably find that many of the students like the kind of things you'll find on my website. Activities around popular films, popular TV programs, pop artists, those kind of things. However, if that's not the case, you can always create a simple activity using open framework programs like PowerPoint, or for those lucky enough not to have thrown away their copy of Switch It Maker 2, use that as well. They all allow you to create very simple activities that the child can use on the computer with an access device. When you begin to use the activity with the student, always remember to have the access device you're planning to use connected to the computer and working. So for example, if you have a switch, have the switch connected. If you're going to use a touchscreen, make sure that the touchscreen is working. This gives us the opportunity to model using that access device. If you're using a switch, model using it. Press the switch and encourage the child to look at the screen. If we're using a touchscreen, make sure you touch the screen to start the activity working. And after a couple of run-throughs, make sure that you offer the child a turn. The child may respond to this or not. Persevere. One of the ways that human babies interact with the world around them is through touch. We're programmed to do it. And it's not uncommon to see children reaching out to try and touch the screen for things that they find interesting. If you're using a switch, remember it's very important to use a picture on the top of the switch with the switch cap, so the child can see quite clearly that the picture relates directly to the reward that's given when the press switch is pressed. If you're using eye gaze, things are a little bit more complex, and I discuss that in more detail a little bit later on in the workshop. Perhaps the most useful advice I can give you when you're working with students at this stage is simply this: keep your eyes open and keep your mouths closed. Eyes open so we can make careful observation of how the child is responding to that activity. Are they looking? Are they listening? Are they responding positively? Are they making any attempt to initiate that activity, either by touching the screen directly or by looking to you to do that? Mouths closed because it's all too easy to swamp the child with additional information. Decide on the prompting strategy that you're going to use and stick to it. Keep this little phrase in the back of your mind while you're working. Motivate, model, and move out of the way. What I mean by move out of the way is give people time to respond. When you offer them a turn, wait to see what's happening. Remember, children working at this level often need much longer times to process things. Give your prompt and wait, and when you think you've waited enough, wait another minute. This can be really hard to do, especially for classroom support staff who need to be seen to be doing. Make sure that you let classroom staff know that it's okay to wait, to not do anything, to simply look at and observe what the child's doing and give them an extended period in which to respond. One piece of software you may find useful at this stage is SEN Switcher. I designed SEN Switcher over 20 years ago for the Northern Grid for Learning. It's proved to be one of the most useful tools we have for people working at experiential level and early switch use. Choose one of the two experiential levels, either patterns or pictures, depending on the interests of your learner. You can then use the settings to tailor the program to more closely meet the needs of your learner. For example, we can change the foreground and background colours. So perhaps if I was working with a child who liked yellow and black, I may choose a yellow background with black patterns, or red patterns with a white background. I can also select or deselect any of the activities simply by clicking them I can turn them off or on. I'll turn these off. I can also decide the animation length, so how long the activity will play for before it changes. It's currently set to 10 seconds. When I'm ready to go, I click the button Go. At this level we need to be patient, and that means trying as many different types of activities, as many different types of stimulus, in order to try and elicit those positive responses. Remember too that what the child actually responds to may not be what's happening on the screen. It may be you. It may be the way that you respond to the child interacting with what's happening on the screen. And that's important information too. We hope you've enjoyed the first part of this Motivate, Engage, Influence and Control workshop. Join us for the second part, where we'll be looking at switches and switch progression for this group of students.